Bradley. I am the Elementary Social Studies Associate here at the Department of Education, and I'm really excited that y'all are here with me today to talk about Elementary Social Studies 101, which is just the basics of some of the instructional resources we have available for you here at the department, and also the basics of the standards document as well. We're going to talk about all the different elements that are within standards, and I'm looking forward to it. Just some quick webinar norms as we get started. Up at the top of your screen, you'll see a bar. On the left-hand side, that chat bubble is how you'll access the chat. We're going to have you drop some things in there today, so you'll just click on that to have it pull up on the right-hand side of your screen. If you need to raise your hand, that function's there as well to grab our attention. Reactions can be sent by clicking on smiley face, and then also your camera and microphone controls, which I see many of you have figured out already. So Christy will be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to send those there, and we'll try to get those answered for you as we go. So in the chat, I would like you to send what you hope to learn today, and also one thing you already know about the 2019 Social Studies Standards for elementary. Right, resources to support teachers. See several people typing, and I really appreciate it. More support for planning. Right, integration. Skills and content. All right, thank you all so much. Just kind of wanted to see where we are and see if there was anything that I was going to need to address as we go through to try to make sure that I was satisfying y'all's needs today. So this is the profile of the South Carolina graduate. It's something that you guys are probably familiar with, is to prepare our students to be ready for their college, career, and military readiness as they go out into the world. In the chat, could you drop where you think you see social studies within this graphic? Yes, it's a little bit everywhere. We have it here with social sciences, with global perspectives, and also here with collaboration, teamwork, and problem solving, critical thinking. There's a lot of that critical thinking in social studies. And we'll actually come back to this later because there are parts within each standard that align to this. So moving along, I kind of like to think about our social studies standards like a staircase. And the reason that I want to show you the entire spectrum is because elementary is really truly building the foundation for everything that's going to come after. So within social studies, we have specific strands that kind of run through. The first being U.S. history. And you can see here in the staircase, there's a really clear progression where it's hitting in every step along the way up. We also have green stars here on World Civ and Modern World History. And the reason that we're addressing this is because all of these classes are organized in a similar way and the standards are written in a similar way. Our geography courses are organized a little bit differently around theme, and we're going to talk about that later since that affects grade 3. And you can see here, while the progression looks a little bit less smooth, we're still hitting it on every step of the staircase on the way up. So we do still have that vertical articulation up through high school. So here, there are some orange stars appearing on the screen. And even though this looks a little bit more disjointed, we do have another progression here for our civics and government and also for economics. So those foundations that you're building in K2, you do see them again in high school, particularly in your U.S. government economics classes. So you really are building the foundation for all social studies courses, K through 12 in elementary. So a quick question for all of you all. Who writes the standards? You can drop it in the chat. You can come off mute. Who do you think writes the standards? We've got a committee of SC educators and field experts. Yeah, so y'all are exactly right. There's a large group of people. It's primarily educators, instructional coaches, district leaders, business and community members. So there's really a wide group of stakeholders, like all of you have said in the chat, that are involved in this process. And I kind of wanted to point this out because we're coming up on this cyclical review process. So there are going to be opportunities for you all to provide feedback on standards as we move through that process. So just be on the lookout for those. I'd love to have y'all's input. and just something to bring to your attention. And it's also some of the best professional development, I'll add, that I think you can get is participating in assessment committees or the standards committees, just because of the level of conversations that you have. So I really do encourage you to get involved in any way that you can when that information comes out in the applications for committees and public review. The first thing we kind of want to cover is what is a standard? And it's the basic statement of the most important determined expectations for student learning in any discipline, which for us is social studies. And it's something that's consensually determined by that committee that we just talked about. All of those different people come together to make these decisions. And it is a framework. It's not something that is a checklist. It's not like an item by item that you go through and can tick off, but it is the framework for everything that we do within our classrooms. It's not sequence for instruction. Sometimes I feel like this is a little bit more apparent in other subjects outside of social studies, because apparently, especially when you get into like grades 4 and 5 and you have US history, there's a tendency to, follow in order chronologically, because that's how we often see history presented. But I do know of teachers who have sometimes taught things backwards or even taught thematically by types of things across. So you aren't tied to the order that things are in that document. And again, it's not a curriculum and it doesn't prescribe the instructional strategies and approaches. Y'all are the experts there. You know your classrooms, you know your students, so you know what's going to work for your kids. So I'm going to do something a little bit funny today, and I want y'all to kind of bear with me. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think, we're going on a road trip today, and we're all very excited. We've been planning for months. We got our sub for our class, so we're going to get to go. It's beautiful. It's sunny and 75. And I want you to think about where you're going to go, what you want to eat along the way, and what tools you're going to take as you're pulling out of the driveway. Because where we're going, we're not going to have access to GPS. So we're going to have to rely on some manual things to get there. We need to be prepared in case we lose signal. So in the chat, can you send where you want to go, what you want to eat, and what tools you're going to double check are in your car as we're pulling out of the driveway to go on this trip? Okay, a map and snacks. The beach, Chick-fil-A. I want to go with Samantha. That sounds like fun. California. Oh, we're going cross country. That'll be fun. Chips and a flashlight. Suitcase and some car repair items. Okay, that's a good thing to have. Mountains, candy, and extra water. We all are very prepared for any emergency we're going to have. I'm excited that I get to go with y'all. All right. So today, this road trip is going to be an extended metaphor for all of the resources we have here at the department. The plans that we made are going to guide us through our resources, and each of the tools that we're going to discuss today has a different purpose, and this road trip is going to kind of help us remember what each of those pieces can be used for. So the first is our roadmap, which many of you said we're bringing, and that is our standards document. It helps us plan how we're going to get where we're going and some different stops and directions and turns we have to take along the way. So our standards are like the major steps we have to take or the big places that we're going through. And then all of our indicators are the different turns that we take specifically to get to those standards and get to those stops. They tell us where we're going and how to get there from here. We still have to navigate ourselves, but we can do that by consulting the map. So in order to be able to use a map, we have to be able to read a map. So really quickly, standards we've already talked about are those consensually determined expectations. They're what we expect our students to be able to do at the end of the year. They're kind of those big picture things. Underneath that, you have the enduring understandings, which is what we hope our students walk away with. They're the bigger picture things that we hope that they leave with at the end. And then we have our indicators. So here you'll see this arrow is pointing at some funny numbers and letters. That is our indicator coding system. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in just a minute, because it is sort of like a street address. It lets you know where you are, but there's also useful information embedded within that coding that can be helpful for you in your planning. And then we have our indicator itself, which is all of our information on what students need to do, including content, skill, and theme. They provide the essential guidance for ongoing inquiry and assessment both in the classroom and also, I guess, at the state level. The last section over here on the side is what they call a key concept. I like to think of that as being a brief summary. It's like a 3-word summary of what that standard is about, and it's really helpful just to kind of cue your brain. So really quickly, the different kinds of coding that we run across before we actually dive into the document. In K2, we have our coding by grade level, strand or standard, and then indicator number. I wanted to bring up the coding because our courses in K2 are organized in a different way than grade 3, which is a little bit different in grades 3 and 4. In K2, all of our content is broken, they're sort of siloed into these 4 big buckets of history, geography, government, and civics and government and economics. So everything is in those 4 buckets, and there's one bucket. So the letter in the middle tells you which of those 4 buckets it is. And that's helpful when you're kind of looking at sequencing across K2 as far as what they've learned in each of those areas as they move up. Secondly, we've got geography, which has a few more numbers, grade level course, standard, indicator number, and then theme. So the geography courses, which are grades 3, 7, and human geo in high school, are all organized by theme. So having that extra indicator number with the standard is what differentiates them, since you sometimes have multiple standards or indicators that are of the same theme within a standard. And the themes stay the same in geography throughout 3, 7, and human geo. So if you're somebody that supports K through 12, that's something useful to kind of keep in mind. And lastly, your history courses. So if you're grade 4 or 5, this is you, where you have your grade level or course, your standard, and your indicator or skill. In all of our history courses, there are 6 indicators per standard. Each one of those indicators is assigned a skill. There are 6 historical thinking skills. And so when you look at your indicator coding for whatever indicator you're working on, or multiple indicators that you're working on in class that day, because we know that our indicators are not taught in isolation, that will help you identify more quickly what the skill is without having to actually dive into the verbiage and figuring out what verb corresponds to what skill when you're doing that. So now Christy has sent a link in the chat. I'm going to ask that you look through the standards document for about 2 minutes, and then we're going to discuss what you find. I encourage you to dive into the table of contents at the beginning and look at the resources throughout the entire document, start to finish, because there are some things at the end that are sometimes forgotten about that can be really helpful. And then we'll discuss some of those things in just a minute. I'm going to start my timer. All right, so we're back. Can I get 3 volunteers to share something that they noticed within that document? It could be a new section. It could be something that you noticed with the coding, and you can either do it in the chat or come off mute.
Notice that at the end they have the skills progression for the thinking skills, which kind of helps me as a 4th grade teacher see where my students need to be in order to be successful in 5th grade and beyond.
Yeah, awesome. I do love the progressions, and what's neat is there is the progression there for 3 through 12, but there's also where our primary skills are found as well. There is a progression there specifically for K2 skills. And since there aren't deconstructed thinking skills for K2, that's where those are found as well. So it is really helpful to kind of be able to see that progression along. I'm seeing the geography skills progression, the glossary. Yeah, so I'm glad that I found that and appreciated that. That's actually one of the things that I was going to point out here. Is that everything articulates vertically. That progression there at the end kind of helps show you that. And then the appendix resources, because sometimes those are forgotten about. Like I said, there's a really great thinking skills and geography skills progression and a glossary full of vocabulary. Even as somebody who spends a lot of time in this document, it is helpful sometimes to dig into that glossary and look at those terms. There's also additional information in the front matter if you do have any questions about how the standards document was written. Everything is evidence-based, so the citations for the research that they use to write this is in the front, and there's also information on all of the sections or pieces of the standards document in that front matter as well. All right, so next we're going to have a city guide. So all of the stops along the way, we need to see what we can do there. So for a little bit more information about the stops, you can refer to the alignment guides. Christy is sending a link in the chat to the instructional resources page, and you'll notice that there are two different groupings there, one from 2019 and one from 2024. The 2024 alignment guides are really great for grades 4 and 5 if you're a teacher of either of those. And then the 2019 are great for K through 3. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look through those, and then we're going to talk about some of the different pieces of those resources. So I'm going to go ahead and start that timer. Okay. So now we're going to come back. If I could get 3 volunteers again to share something that they noticed in the document. And if you wouldn't mind saying which one you looked at, because there's a different alignment guide for every grade. Again, you can put that in the chat, or you can come off mute if you're comfortable.
Hello, I looked at the grade 4 document and I really like the example questions and sentence stems for comparison. Sometimes our students have an idea of what they want to say, but they need a little support in getting that out. So the sentence stems will help with that comparison.
Yeah, okay, so the sentence stems are great, and they're really helpful kind of in facilitating that conversation, helping people find words. So I'm glad that you found those helpful. In the chat, someone has said they looked at 2024 grade 4 and the DOK examples. And multiple alignment guides for 4, 8, 5, 8, and US history. So in 2024, they decided just to provide a little bit of extra information and context for those. So there's a bit refreshed. And again, it seems like y'all really like the sentence starters, which those are probably my favorite part of the document as well. And the depth of knowledge examples are really helpful because it shows kind of how you can grow that concept across, and it also helps a little bit with scaffolding.
I really like,
sorry. Oh, you can go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I really like the possible questions for inquiry. I've taught high school social studies and elementary social studies, and I really try to do it through the lens of research and hit a lot of those informational standards for ELA as well. And so it helps me think about, am I asking the question in a way that's going to give them to go a little bit deeper, but I also have then the content there that I can do a quick check when I walk around and see the research they're doing to see, are they hitting the main things that I need them to hit? So it's helpful to me as a snapshot kind of to think about what I'm looking for from my students during that class period.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
And Reese, I was going to point out, I noticed that Julie asked why they had both versions. And when we revised the alignment guides, we wanted to leave those old guides available because they were a little different. It is the same content, but sometimes the content lists are reorganized or just chunked differently. You'll also see there were expository narratives that were rather long in some of the older alignment guides, and people still expressed an interest in having access to those. So we just wanted to make sure we left both versions available.
So thank you, Christy. All right. So we kind of talked about a lot of these things already. Some more information on the indicators, suggestions for potential content, the expository narrative and sentence stems that you all have talked about, and then as well as questions or example tasks. So it's organized a little bit differently in the old alignment guide, which you can see here. And then as Christy just said, it was kind of reorganized in the 2024 update. We've still got the questions for inquiry. We've still got that potential content list and sample tasks. So we had a nice lunch stop and we explored around town for about an hour to stretch our legs, and we've gotten back on the road. And all of a sudden I decide I want to set cruise control, and I realize since it's a rental car, I don't know how to do it. So I'm going to have to check my manual to see how that works. So we have thinking skill progressions, like you'll notice there's one in the back of the standards document, but we also have these historical and geographic thinking skills progressions that were created by our personalized learning team in collaboration with the social studies team that break down those skills into I can statements. So we're going to take about 2 minutes. And if you're a third grade teacher, I'd recommend looking at geographic, or if you're a fourth or fifth grade teacher, I'd recommend looking at historical. We're going to take about 2 minutes to look at those documents, and then we're going to come back together again. All right, so now we're going to come back together again. And if we can get 3 volunteers to type in the chat or say out loud something that you noticed about the document. It could be something that you find useful. It could be a question. But what were some noticings? I can statements are color coordinated. Yeah, so you can kind of see that progression across as far as how that skill changes and grows at the different levels. A couple people typing statements with thinking skills. And yeah, in 100 different ways to show learning. So there are several different resources here, not only with the thinking skills progressions themselves, but also different ways that students can show that learning and what they can create using these skills. So again, we have the historical and the geographic. They're I can statements with very specific tasks, and they're also with depth of knowledge. So these 4 different levels of the 4 different stars align to different levels in social studies. So that most of the time in elementary, you're going to be working with the 1 star or 2 star, since that's grades 4 and 5, and then grade 3 star 3 and star 4 are going to be your grade 8 and U.S. history and Constitution, since this is the progression that follows. So most of the time you're going to be working in 1 and 2 star, but sometimes if you're a 5th grade teacher, it's good to pull a task from that 3 star column to kind of sort of as a stretch task for your students. And again, there's those statements. The geography thinking progression looks a little bit different. As we talked about earlier, our geography courses are organized a little bit differently by theme. So our thinking skills here are grouped by theme, and you can see how each one of those skills applies within the theme within geography. So again, you can use that indicator coding to sort of match that indicator to this to see what you can do with each of those skills underneath that theme. We're going to take a second and take a deep breath. I know that was kind of a lot. And we're actually going to get into now our standards themselves and how they're written, how each of those indicators is written. So in social studies, we have a bit of a braided approach. We have content, skill, and theme. Each indicator has all 3 of these components. So again, I said we'd see this again. Here's our profile. We can see here that we've got the knowledge and the skills. So at least 2 of those ropes in that braid are very visible in this profile. So to start with theme, we kind of have 2 different types of theme or categories of theme in social studies. We have overarching themes, which are K through 12, and then sub-themes, which are in grades 3 through 12. These are the larger connections between content that are going to form patterns across all of our courses and across grade levels. So it's something that changes, that stays the same from K through 12. This is what links it all together. So when you go from U.S. history in grades 4 and 5, these themes and these bigger patterns in the story of human history stay the same in grade 6 when you're looking at World Civ. So the big themes stay the same. So before we get into these more specifically, I want you to think about a salad. Our overarching themes are like ingredients in a salad. They're all distinct. They have their own features and flavor. And then sub-themes are mixes of those ingredients for the salad. So with our overarching themes, those are things like history, geography, economics, and civics and government. Those are our 4 themes in K2 that we talked about earlier, right? So we see pieces of all 4 of these as we go into those courses with the more complex or mixed sub-themes. Sub-themes look like what you see on the right up here: economic advancements, expansion and migration. They have pieces of the overarching themes within them. So like with expansion and migration, we know there's going to be a geography component because it's talking about land and space. But we also know that there might be a civics and government component there with policy that resulted in expansion and migration. So a lot of times you're going to be working with these salads that are pieces of these overarching themes. But those core 4 overarching themes that we have pieces of are what stays the same from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I'm going to give y'all just a second to read. These are definitions of what those 4 overarching themes are and what they contain. And then we have an activity that we're going to do together in pulling out those pieces. If I could just get a thumbs up, either a reaction or whatever when y'all are good, and we can move on. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay, so when you're looking at the 4 names, if you just look at the 4 names on the left, you can kind of figure out what those are. Like, that's pretty clear, right? You know what history is, you know what geography is, they're pretty clear cut. This is a theme from grade 3 geography. So what I would like you to do is read that sub-themes up here at the top, and in the chat or out loud, identify any terms or words you see that fall into one of the 4 categories we just read about. So history, geography, economics, or civics and government. So it's landform geography. Physical systems. Yeah, so that falls under geography pretty clear. Natural resources. Yeah. So we've hit a lot of the geography terminology. Yeah, so natural resources can also be economics. So can benefits and costs, right? Yeah, so we see the economics piece in here. And we see the economic relationships. I see somebody did that. Somebody said the political piece here. All right. So as you can see, there are 3 different ingredients in this salad sub-theme. So even though this is a geography theme, we see pieces of those overarching themes that we've had in our previous grades here. So those big 4 things are what connects everything. All right. So now we're going to look at grade 4, and we're going to do the same thing. What words or terms do you see here that would fall into each of those categories? What ingredients do we see? Compromise could equal 4. Expansion, extension of boundaries. Okay. I'm going to click this. So we've got the expansions, boundaries for geography. We see economics again. I think somebody pointed out we had political and then controversy. And as I believe Melanie McLemore said, compromise could equal all 4. So sometimes, like you see, controversy here is in 2 colors. Pieces can be or fall into multiple categories. So the reason that we're looking at this is because when you're in, I guess these upper elementary grades, it's important to read the sub-themes before you start. Because if you just saw economic settlement and territorial expansions, that gives you an idea maybe of what it's about, but you don't know all of the pieces that fall under that theme. So it makes it harder to identify when you're doing your planning and your instruction. So by having a really good understanding of the pieces that are within these sub-themes, it's going to help you make those bigger picture connections for your students when they start getting into some of those more theme-based, theme-heavy skills tasks. And this is also going to help if you got 5th graders that are about to transition into 6th grade, having those understandings of those bigger picture things is going to help when that content changes from 2 years of U.S. history to World Civ in 6th grade, because it stays the same. Oh, and social, I forgot. There's social and the study of changing, which is history. The study of continuity and change over time is history. So now we're going to look at skills since we've got themes down. And skills are how our students interact with the content. It's how they make connections and begin to think for themselves, and they create the rigor within our standards and the complexity because they're doing something with that knowledge. It's not just that they can know or repeat information. And also increases their overall understanding of social studies material. And it's also to prepare students for critical thinking in real world situations. So these are things that they can use outside of our classroom, which prepares them to the future in really big ways. I'm also going to note that state law requires higher order thinking skills. So this is part of the reason that it's such a big part of our standards, even in elementary. And again, I just want to say this really is the foundation. So we need to try to teach these as best we can, because that helps our students when they get up into middle and high school and those things start to get really complex. When you start combining skills and content, I like to think about social studies as a house. And to build a house, you first have to lay a foundation, which is your theme. Everything slots into that foundation of theme. That's where everything is connected. Then you have your bricks and your wood. You have your building materials, which is your content. But in order to be able to build the house, you have to have tools to work the materials. So that's your skills. So again, your content is what students know, and your skills are what students can do with it or how they interact with it. And I just want to point out again that these skills are things that are transferable and applicable outside of our classroom walls. So, you can use a hammer to build a house, but you can also use a hammer to build a table to go in the house later. So multiple uses for these things with the critical thinking. Where you can find the skills, we've already kind of talked about. Y'all saw the deconstructed skills, I believe, when y'all looked through the standards document. So we have that in 3 through 12. And then again, that skills progression document that we talked about earlier. And then you had K2 there at the end. So now we're going to do an activity, and I'm going to pop y'all into breakout rooms to kind of do this together. We're going to do a scavenger hunt. It's bingo. So we want to see which group can get bingo the quickest by using the documents that we've looked at today to answer these questions about historical and geographic thinking skills. And the documents that we have referred to are linked at the top of the sheet. So you're going to be forced to make a copy in Google. And if I could get a thumbs up when y'all have a copy of that, so that I know y'all can edit it. And then I'm going to pop everybody into breakout rooms once we get that. All right, I'm seeing a thumbs up. I see a hand up. Did you have okay. Everybody's kind of filtering back in. Oh, people got kicked.
Uh-oh.
Sometimes Microsoft drops people when they're coming in and out. So
Skills?
making sure we got everybody. All right, does it look like we got everybody back? I can't remember exactly what the number was before. I'm trying to look.
I thought it was 22, 16 or 22.
I think we had about 4 people in each of the groups. I think we're pretty much all back. Okay. So, Christy, you just sent a link in the chat. Thank you, Christy. That will allow you to make a copy of the answer key, so you can go back and look at that. If y'all like, we can look at it together, and if there's any questions, we can talk about them. But first, I'd like to kind of do group discussion about what you noticed when you were doing this, because I did hear some interesting discussion in some of the rooms. So I have a few questions. The first is, how many rows did your group complete? If we know. Or how many rows did you complete? Just out of curiosity.
3.
3, okay.
Yeah.
1, first column down. 3, okay. And so I'm sure different groups did different things. So that's cool. Which document for reference was most helpful when you were doing this activity? What did you find yourself reaching for the most? Skills progression. So both standards and the thinking skills. So yeah, skills progressions. Yeah, okay, so people were reaching toward both of those things. All right, which is good. So did you notice any overlap between skills that sometimes made answering things a little bit complicated? So all of our skills that we have in social studies are distinct skills, but there is overlap between them. And so we kind of want to think about that when we're doing our planning for our teaching, because we can teach those things together. And it sort of deepens our students' understanding. So that is one of the benefits to the skills progression, at the thinking skills progression, I think, because you can see those pieces very clearly where there's some overlap. I see somebody typing, so I'm gonna let them finish. Yes. So purpose and audience, historical surroundings. So you're using evidence within contextualization for that. So you see both those pieces of those skills there within that. All right. And then do you know where to find further support if you need support with the thinking skills? Yes. So y'all can email me or call me. I'm always here to support. We also have a Canvas unit on that thinking skill, the thinking skills progressions that's on our website if you're interested in doing that to learn a little bit more about the document. And of course, I'm always here to answer any questions that y'all have. So the last of the 3 strands in our braid is content. And it's something that's probably the most familiar to you. It's what you're going to remember from when you were in your social studies courses. But this is also something that in my recent needs assessment was targeted as one of the areas where teachers expressed a need for support as far as content and knowing what to teach. So again, that's where our standards are not prescriptive. So we have to sort of pull that out. That's where the alignment guides can be very helpful. I will note that they're not all inclusive, but they are a really good starting place when you're looking at those standards and indicators and trying to figure out where to go. And then sometimes you'll notice that you'll see the same content in a couple of places. And that's because the lens with which we're approaching that content is a little bit different. So we still need to teach it, and we can also bundle indicators. So if we see something a couple of times, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to teach it 3 times, but the way that we look at it might be a little bit different. We might adjust the way that we talk about it over the course of the class period. And then the other thing is building content confidence, which again, like I said, that was one of the areas that people said they need support. We could do an entire webinar series just on content support. So today I'm just going to give you some different places where you can go for background knowledge. Unfortunately, there is no fast and easy way to gain background knowledge, but if you are curious and you do get curious, there are resources of every type and format out there you can learn from. I like to read, so I read a lot of books, but there's podcasts and audiobooks and lots of different places you can go. One thing that I like to ask teachers is, where would you tell your students to go look if they had a question about content, and actually start there yourself as a jumping off point before when you start going down that rabbit hole. So these are some trusted resources that are already available to you. SC Discus is a really great one. The National Archives are great, especially the Library of Congress is my favorite because they've got a lot of really great teacher resources. They have a history timeline, like a U.S. history timeline, which is really great because they've got background information on each chunk of U.S. history and resources that are pre-pulled, so primary and secondary sources pulled for you. Trusted websites. Don't discount your local libraries. If you are a primary teacher and you're teaching those 1st grade community standards, your local librarians can be a font of knowledge for local history, as well as if you're somewhere like that has a local museum like Lexington County, or I know there's several in Beaufort, those can be helpful as well. And then archives and the textbooks that you have from the school can also be good. So if you have any specific questions about specific content, you can also email me for recommendations on specific topics, and I can point you in a direction to go do a little bit more looking. So I wanted to take a minute and just kind of practice pulling content out of a standard. So I have pulled a 1st grade history indicator here. And I want to take a minute and sort of analyze this for essential information. And the reason I have pulled this 1st grade indicator is because depending on where you are in the state, your content for this indicator is going to look a little bit different because it's specific to your community. I'll take a minute and read, and then if y'all give me a thumbs up. I'm seeing one. So is there anything, I'm seeing several thumbs up. Thank y'all very much. So do you see anything in here that stands out? I'm gonna throw a little hint up on the screen. See any buckets or chunks of information that you can pull out? Yeah, over time. So we know this is going to be something where we're going to have multiple content about the same thing from different time periods. Yeah, so students and communities, that's a bucket, so wherever you're teaching. And one's community will vary, yes. So then if we're talking about a community, so we got similarities and differences. Yeah, so what skill is that since we just practiced? Yeah, saw somebody say comparison. Yeah, so this is like the foundations of that skill of comparison that we see coming in as early as first grade. So if we are going to be talking about our community and other communities, what traits are we going to probably need to talk about? What do our students need to know? That would be the next question. Yeah, so your demographic information. Still see a couple of people typing, so I'm gonna let them finish. Relative location. Yeah, and thank y'all, by the way, for being such active participants today. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, so geography. So you're going to talk about things like your basic economic base. So what do people do for work? How do they make money? Maybe when was your community founded, right? So some basic things about history of the community, where you're at, what people do for work, what does it look like? Where are you at in comparison? So, and then you're going to do the same thing for other communities because as we said, it's our community and other communities. And we know that our skill is comparison. So there, just in the last couple of minutes, we were able to pull out all of the different things, several of the different things that we would need to hit for this indicator. And even though this is a pretty simple example with being a first grade indicator, you can do this same process with your third, fourth, and fifth grade indicators as far as looking for the who, what, when, and where that are going to provide you the hints on to kind of focus you and hints on what you need to pull out. And then the alignment guides can also be helpful with that as well. So now we're going to move into a period of reflection. Christy is going to drop a link in the chat and we're going to go to a Google Slides. Everybody's going to pick a different slide and fill in the boxes. If you are not able to edit, if somebody will please let me know. I've got it set where you should be able to, but we're just going to have about 5 minutes for this, for reflection. All right, so we're going to go ahead and come back together. And in the chat, Christy is going to send a link, and this will let you make a copy of a document that has some helpful links for different resources and some of the different topics we covered today. At the end, there's also some support specifically for places to go build background knowledge, where I think there's some really helpful information. So that's there for y'all's reference. All of the documents and things that we referenced today, as far as department resources, are also linked in that document for you, so they're all in one place.